The day started like any other in Sarah's life. The sound of birds chirping outside her window and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the house filled the morning air. Sarah, a university student, was getting ready for her lectures when she noticed Ahmed, her elder brother, sitting at the breakfast table. He was, as usual, calm and collected, his face buried in the newspaper. "Good morning, Ahmed," Sarah greeted him with a smile. Ahmed looked up and returned her smile. "Morning, Sarah. Big plans for the day?" "Just the usual, lectures, assignments, and meeting friends," Sarah replied. She paused for a moment and added, "What about you? You're always so composed. Don't you ever get stressed?" Ahmed chuckled lightly. "I guess I've learned to manage my stress. Nothing is worth losing your peace over." Sarah admired that about Ahmed. He had always been her rock, dependable, wise, and calm in any situation. Little did she know that beneath his composed demeanor, Ahmed was carrying a burden that would soon turn her world upside down. A few days later, Sarah began noticing subtle but undeniable changes in Ahmed's behavior. He seemed preoccupied, often glued to his phone with an intensity she hadn't seen before. He would spend long stretches of time typing furiously, only to stop abruptly when Sarah entered the room. Even more unusual were the phone calls, taken in hushed tones behind closed doors. It was so unlike Ahmed, who had always been an open book, eager to share the smallest details of his life with her. The shift wasn't lost on Sarah. At first, she dismissed it as Ahmed having found a new hobby or a friend he wanted to keep private. But as the days passed, the secrecy only deepened. Ahmed would retreat into his room for hours, emerging only for meals and with a vague, distracted air about him. One evening, while they were watching a movie together, a ritual that usually brought them closer, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. Sarah noticed the name flash briefly on the screen, but before she could make it out, Ahmed snatched the phone up with almost exaggerated urgency. "I'll be right back," he muttered, already halfway out of the room. "Who was that?" Sarah called after him, trying to sound casual despite the churn of suspicion in her chest. "Just work," Ahmed said over his shoulder without breaking stride. He disappeared into the hallway, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and a growing unease. This wasn't like the brother she knew, the one who always made time for her, who had never needed to keep secrets. She told herself not to jump to conclusions, to give him the benefit of the doubt. But deep down, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, and it wouldn't let her rest. One sunny afternoon, Sarah found herself in Ahmed's room, browsing his bookshelf for something to read. Her fingers grazed over the spines of novels when she noticed an envelope peeking out of a partially open drawer. It was marked boldly with the word "Confidential." A chill ran down her spine. Why does Ahmed have something like this? She wondered, her pulse quickening. She knew she shouldn't invade his privacy, but curiosity gnawed at her. After a moment of hesitation, she succumbed. With trembling hands, she slid the envelope out and unfolded its contents. Her eyes darted across the documents inside, names she didn't recognize, detailed financial transactions, and notes referencing meetings at peculiar locations. None of it made sense, but one thing was clear: these weren't the kind of papers her brother would normally have. Before she could examine them further, the sound of approaching footsteps jolted her into action. Heart pounding, she hastily tucked the papers back into the envelope, slid it into the drawer, and perched on the bed, pretending to scroll through her phone. Ahmed entered the room, his face a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with something deeper, almost guarded. "Just borrowing a book," Sarah replied quickly, holding up a random title and forcing a smile. He nodded slowly, though his eyes lingered on her a moment too long. As Sarah left the room, her thoughts swirled with unease. Something was definitely not right. That evening, Sarah couldn't hold back her curiosity any longer. She decided to confront Ahmed. "Ahmed, is everything okay? You've been acting so different lately," she asked as they sat in the living room. Ahmed looked at her for a moment, his face unreadable. "Everything's fine, Sarah. Why do you ask?" "I don't know." You've been so secretive, taking calls, locking yourself in your room. It's not like you. Ahmed sighed, leaning back in his chair. Sarah, sometimes it's better not to ask too many questions. Why can't you just tell me? Sarah pressed. Ahmed hesitated but didn't answer. Instead, he got up and walked away, leaving Sarah frustrated and more determined than ever to find out the truth. Sarah couldn't let it go. The next day, she followed Ahmed discreetly when he left the house. She trailed him to a rundown building on the outskirts of town. Her heart pounded as she watched him enter. After waiting for a few minutes, she summoned her courage and followed him inside. The building was dimly lit and eerily quiet. She heard voices coming from one of the rooms and crept closer to listen. Everything is in place, Ahmed's voice said. We just need to finalize the details. Another voice replied, Good. We can't afford any mistakes. Sarah's blood ran cold. What was Ahmed involved in? She couldn't stay hidden any longer. Just as she turned to leave, she accidentally knocked over a stack of crates, creating a loud crash. The door opened and Ahmed stepped out, his eyes widening when he saw her. Sarah? What are you doing here? He demanded. I could ask you the same thing, Sarah shot back. What's going on, Ahmed? Who are these people? Ahmed grabbed her arm and pulled her outside. This isn't the place to talk. Let's go home. Back at home, the tension in the room was palpable. Ahmed paced back and forth, his face a storm of emotions. Finally, he stopped and let out a deep sigh, running a hand through his hair. Sarah, he began, his voice heavy with regret. You weren't supposed to find out. Sarah's heart pounded as she waited for him to continue. I've been working undercover with the authorities, Ahmed confessed, his words tumbling out. That building you followed me to is connected to a criminal organization. My job is to gather evidence against them. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. You're working undercover. Ahmed, why didn't you tell me? I couldn't, Sarah, Ahmed said, his voice firm but tinged with guilt. It's dangerous work. The fewer people who know, the safer it is for you and for me. I didn't want to put you at risk. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, spilling over as the weight of his revelation sank in. But you've been risking your own life. Ahmed, what if something happens to you? Ahmed stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. His eyes softened, though his tone remained serious. I've been careful, Sarah. I have a team backing me up, and every step we take is calculated. But I need you to promise me something. What? She whispered, her voice trembling. You can't tell anyone about this, not a single soul. Promise me, Sarah. Wiping her tears, Sarah nodded, her voice steady despite her fear. I promise. A week later, Ahmed's mission reached its peak. The authorities planned a raid on the criminal organization's hideout, and Ahmed was at the center of the operation. Sarah spent the entire night pacing, unable to sleep, her heart heavy with worry. The next morning, Ahmed returned home, exhausted but safe. The operation had been a success, and the criminals were apprehended. I'm done, Sarah, Ahmed said, a faint smile on his face. It's over. Sarah hugged him tightly, relief washing over her. You scared me, Ahmed, but I'm proud of you. Life slowly returned to normal, but Sarah's perspective had changed. She saw Ahmed not just as her composed and dependable brother, but as someone who had silently carried a tremendous burden to protect others. Ahmed, too, seemed lighter, free from the weight of the secret he had been keeping. Together they moved forward, closer than ever, their bond strengthened by the truth.